Welcome to the recorded version of Discovering and Communicating the Need for Care from December 13th, 2018, brought to you by the American Society of Aging and a generous sponsorship from Right at Home. Okay, our presenter today is Diane Darby Beach. Diane is a gerontologist with 28 years' experience in public health and elder care. So welcome and thanks for joining us, Diane.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Great. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending. I'm really looking forward to this today. And as Steve said, we'll be taking questions at the end, but please feel free to submit them at any point, and then the last 15 minutes will be Q&A. So today we're here to talk about what to recognize when an elder needs more help. And this is especially timely now due to the holidays. People are getting together. They maybe have not seen each other for months, sometimes a year, and they can notice some rapid deterioration in their loved one and are wondering, wow, is she still safe at home? Is he still safe at home? Does he need assisted living? Does she need home care? What are we going to do? Does mom or dad need to move in with me? These are all questions that come up and involve lots of different decisions along the way. So today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what to look for. As Steve said, my background is in public health. Just a little personal note about me, and the reason I have been in dementia care and caregiving for so many years is my grandmother had Parkinson's-related dementia. She was a very vibrant woman. She did Jack LaLanne every day, and she went from that to being slumped over in a wheelchair, being over-medicated, had Parkinson's-related dementia. It was just, a mess. And, of course, my heart just went out to her, and I was considering a move from public health into another arena, and so I went into dementia care and caregiving and have been doing this for 30 years. So most care, I will tell you, for our elders is provided for the entirety of their disease or their illness by family members or close friends, which we consider informal caregivers. So for our informal caregivers, you have been thrown into a situation where you've not necessarily been trained for it. You didn't necessarily want this job, but you're doing it, and so I applaud you. If you're considering whether or not your loved one needs more help, this is the right place to be. We're going to talk about what to look for. All right. So changing conditions in older patients can indicate that the current living arrangement or environment is no longer safe for them. And as you would imagine, these are hard decisions, not just for you as family members or as practitioners, but for the person that needs more care. This has been a person who's had a vibrant life, usually with independence, and now that's being taken away. So we really have to have empathy and really be careful about how we approach these conversations. So like I said, during the holidays, families are often reunited after a period of absence. It's in these situations that you may recognize a significant deterioration in your loved one or decline, warranting possibly some change of living situation. Healthcare professionals can take this opportunity to communicate with families, to intervene with them, to help improve that person's quality of care. You as practitioners are in a prime situation to intervene and start having these conversations. And these conversations oftentimes are easier for the elder to have with you than to have with their own family members. There is this saying, and I experienced it myself, you can't be a prophet in your own land. I've been a gerontologist for 30 years. My parents still don't listen to me. So it's coming sometimes from the outside where that information can be processed and absorbed more readily. So again, as professionals, you're in a prime situation to intervene here. What are the objectives for today's session? Well, I want you to be able to list the signs that indicate an elderly patient or client or resident is no longer safe in the present living environment. What are those signs? You will be able to describe changes that signify that additional help is needed by that elderly client, and describe a plan for extra care when needed. And I can't stress this enough. When we can get ahead of the 8-ball, when we can be proactive rather than reactive, we are really helping people, because nobody makes a great decision when they're in crisis mode. So the more that we can help families plan ahead, the better off everybody will be. And, I always tell families, it's not like you may never enact that plan. It might not be necessary, but you have it if needed, and that takes a lot of stress off. All right, so what are some of the warning signs? Well, falls. Fall risks are huge. Did your loved one take a fall? Have a medical scare? Did they end up being hospitalized, transported by EMTs, or get in a fender bender or worse? Driving is a huge issue for older adults. And again, this is something we have to tread on lightly and really approach with empathy, because driving, especially in our society, equates independence. It equates autonomy. And when we start taking that away without putting something else in place, we have left that elder to feel isolated. And that leads to depression and a whole host of other problems. So accidents do happen, but as people get older, the odds of them happening again are increased. So what are some of the physical indicators that someone may need more help? A slow recovery, okay? So how did the person you're caring for weather the most recent illness? For example, the flu or a bad cold. Were they really slow to come out of that? Did they have complications or other infections that came as a result of something simple as a cold? Was your elder able and willing to seek medical care when needed? Or did last winter's cold develop into unrelated or untreated bronchitis or asthma or pneumonia? So we want to be looking at all of this. Activities of daily living, we call them our ADLs. Are they having increasingly difficulty managing these ADLs and instrumental ADLs? And I'm going to talk about what that is. Basically, your ADLs are being able to groom, take a bath, get dressed, ambulate, get around. Those are basic activities of daily living. Eat on their own. If they're starting to have difficulties with these can be warning signs. A chronic health condition that's getting worse. Okay, so progressive problems such as COPD, dementia, congestive heart failure can decline gradually or precipitously, but either way, their presence means your loved one will increasingly need help. These are progressive illnesses. They don't get better, right? We don't take the dementia away. We can increase a person's quality of life. We can increase what we call person-centered care, which we do a lot of right at home, but we're not going to take the dementia away. Congestive heart failure only gets worse, right? So we need to be keeping an eye on that person, making sure that they're not readmitted to the hospital, that we're getting ahead of the symptoms and handling them before they get really bad. Okay, next is increased frailty. Does the elder just seem more frail? Do you feel that there's anything different about the person's strength and stature when you hug them? A simple hug will indicate that. You can detect if there's significant weight loss or if they're shaky on their feet. Can your loved one rise easily from a chair? So how do they transfer? Do you need to help them? Can they actually get up out of a chair and get to their walker or just walk across the room? Does the elder seem like he or she is unsteady or unable to balance? So compare these observations to the last time you were together. If you can think back as a family member, let's say you were together last year during the holidays, does your loved one seem like they have decreased or declined in these areas? Decreased body weight. Again, you hug the person. Do they feel thinner? Have they lost weight? Are their clothes loose? Or are they adding notches to their belt because it's too big now? Many conditions from depression to cancer can cause weight loss. Are they trouble getting out to shop or remembering how to cook? So familiar items, familiar tasks, that can cause weight loss. Check the fridge and watch meal prep skills. And sometimes as a family member, you're only going to know this if you spend some time. And I'm not just talking about an hour here or there, because an elder can pull it together because they don't necessarily want you to know that they're declining. I deal with this all the time, especially with dementia. If you've got a family member who lives across the country and they're calling mom, once a day, and mom can pull it together for 10 minutes in the conversation. But if that loved one were out here for a couple of hours or a day or overnight, they would see the changes that happen over time. So those sometimes are hard to detect, especially when you're long distance. Changes in appearance. Okay, what's their personal hygiene looking like? Are their clothes clean or stained and unbuttoned? They may lack the dexterity to manage buttons, or may have lost the strength for managing an ironing board and an iron. Is their hair and makeup done or unkempt? They may be forgetting to shave or forgetting how to shave. You know, one of the big signs with my grandmother, on a personal note, was she was always very kept. Never went out the door without her hair being done and being dressed and being just so. And she went from that to being slumped over in a wheelchair, her hair disheveled, clearly clothes dirty. And this was just so unlike her. So that was one of the biggest signs for me. Strange body odor. Okay. Unfortunately, a close hug can also reveal change in personal hygiene habits. Causes range from memory trouble to depression to other ailments. And this is where we really have to intervene and look at, what maybe the person simply needs some interaction. When elders are isolated, when they don't have help, when they don't have interactions with others, it's a vicious cycle, because what happens is they become depressed. And once you become depressed, your self-esteem plummets. And then it's this vicious cycle, because the more your self-esteem plummets, the more depressed you get, and the less likely you are going to be to want to reach out and to be with others. As people age, their circle of interaction, their circle of life becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And certainly we don't expect them to keep up the same amount of activity or interaction that they had when they were really healthy, but we don't want to eliminate it entirely. All right, so we want to look for decreased body weight. We also, a warning sign is increased body weight. So common causes include an injury, diabetes, dementia, big. So when someone doesn't remember eating, he or she may indulge in meals and snacks all day long and not remember that they had just eaten. Someone with money problems, money struggles, may choose fewer fresh foods and more packaged goods or dried pasta and bread. So what I tell elders and family members and practitioners too, when you go to the grocery store, and I'm certainly not a nutritionist by training, but I know a lot about this, and you want to shop the periphery of the grocery store. Everything in the middle aisles is junk, right? It's packaged. It has a bunch of preservatives in it to keep it on the shelves longer. Your frozen food items, either the vegetables have a ton of salt, the fruit usually has a ton of sugar. This is just not good. So if you stay on the outside of the grocery store, that's where you find your produce, your dairy, your grains, your proteins and meat. Okay, these are where we get our whole foods, and that's where we want to have people concentrate. But when you are having money struggles, or you just want something fast and easy, it's easy for people to go to those middle aisles and grab prepackaged stuff that's just nutrient, empty. All right, so dementia. This is this is the tsunami of healthcare. This is where we're going to see so many more cases, and as professionals, as family members, this is where most of our caregiving is going to take place. And I'll tell you why. 1 in 8 people who are 65 years of age and older will have Alzheimer's type dementia. Now, that's just one type. That's not accounting for vascular dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementia, Parkinson's-related dementia, Lewy body dementia. Alzheimer's you hear most often because it's the most common form of dementia. It accounts for 75% of all of the cases of dementia. So dementia has much more to do with it than just memory. So if people are having some memory issues, it doesn't necessarily mean they have dementia, because dementia has to do with memory, it has to do with language, it has to do with personality and behavior. It's a global deterioration of the brain. So what are some possible dementia symptoms? The universal symptom is short-term memory loss. So somebody with dementia can tell you about an event that they went to, maybe a high school graduation, a wedding, whatever it was, 25 years ago. They can tell you about it in detail. They can tell you what music was played. They can tell you what food was served. They can tell you who was there. But that person with dementia cannot articulate or tell you what they had for breakfast this morning. So short-term memory loss is pretty universal. Loss of reasoning capabilities. So this is why with people with dementia, We don't try to reason with them. That executive function part of the brain is gone. So if you're trying to convince your loved one, it's a cold day out, Mom, if you don't put another layer on, if you don't wear a jacket, you're going to get cold. Now, you and I can reason like that. She can't. She's got dementia. And if you continually try to reason with her, she's going to become more agitated. And now you're going to have a behavior problem. And it's much harder to get out of a behavior cycle than it is to just prevent it from happening in the first place. So rather than reason in that situation, you take the jacket with you if you're going on the outing with Mom. If she's going on the outing with other people, you have the director, whoever's taking them, pack it in a backpack for her. Don't even bother trying to reason, because it's a vicious cycle. Difficulty with familiar tasks. So let's say Alice was a great cook. She was the matriarch of the family. She always prepared meals. Now she can't prepare a meal to save her life because there are too many steps involved. All right? Or Dad always manages the checkbook, the ledger. Now money's going out to telephone solicitors. Things aren't getting paid for. Okay? So these are, once familiar tasks are very difficult to do. Lack of judgment. So they can't make a judgment. Dad never gave money away. Now he's giving money away to telephone solicitors and, preachers like it's nobody's business. Personality changes. You can see somebody who has been maybe very sweet and docile and easy to get along with their whole lives become unmanageable and combative. Memory changes that disrupt daily life. All right, challenges in planning or with solving problems. And lastly, confusion with time and place. So big warning sign. If, we have somebody in early stage disease and they're still home and they can manage to go out to the grocery store, should be an hour-long outing, and they're gone for 3 hours. Why? Because they got lost. They didn't recognize the landmarks that would get them home, the library that's close to their home, the Vaughn's grocery store that's close to their home. None of that makes sense, and they get lost. All right, so what are some of the social indicators that someone might need more help, that being in the current environment is not really conducive to their quality of life? One is signs of active friendships. Does your loved one or your client still get together for lunches or outings with friends or visits with neighbors or participate in their religious activities or other group events? When they start to pull away from these things and isolate, that's an indicator something's happening. And like I said, once they start pulling away, that depression sets in, self-esteem plummets, depression gets worse, it's a vicious cycle. Does he or she talk about others or keep a calendar or appointments? A lack of companionship is associated with depression and heart problems in older adults, and it will make dementia worse. We know as human beings that we need to have social interaction. We need to have relationships. And when we don't, we do get depressed. Signs of isolation. So, are there days spent without leaving the house? This sometimes happens because the person can no longer drive, right, or is afraid to take public transportation. Many older adults feel like they're being locked away if they have to go to assisted living. So what we want to do is kind of diffuse that. When the driving part, if we're going to take that driving part away, one of the most important things is to always replace it with something else, some other modality of transportation, so they still have some semblance of independence. An example that I have is working with a family once. We had a gentleman who was in the early stage, and he needed to stop driving. And so we tried to put him on the power end of that to make that decision because he still had capacity. I said, don't you want to go out on a good note? You don't want to end up in a car accident. You don't want this to happen. What if we sell the car, Dad, and all the money from the proceeds of that sale go to your transportation fund? You can use it for Uber, for Lyft, for public transportation, taxi, whatever you want. That's your money to use to get around. So that's different than us just taking the driving away, saying you can no longer drive, and then leaving him isolated and feeling trapped. All right? We substituted it. We put another alternative in there for him. On the assisted living community and the idea of feeling trapped, and this doesn't just come from the client or the elderly relative or loved one that we have. This also comes from families. Families feel some guilt and trepidation about placing their loved one. But I always try to talk to folks about the fact that assisted living now in this era is much different than what we recall or what our elders recall, because their experience was strictly skilled nursing buildings, and a lot of them were not happy places. This is a much different era. And 9 times out of 10, when I help place somebody in a really good assisted living community, whether it's dementia or straight assisted, people, the elders, they do better because they have more interaction and they have things planned. They don't have to think about it. But they still have independence. And the biggest thing about going into an assisted living community or being placed is that now the person can succeed in that environment. And believe it or not, your elders, as long as they say they want to stay at home, but when they're no longer able to manage at home and succeed at home, their self-esteem takes a hit. So once they get into an environment, and that could be assisted living or it could be having home care, and they're able to succeed, their self-esteem increases and they're actually happier. All right, what other social indicators? Has your loved one cut back on activities and interests? So is a hobby abandoned? Did Dad always love to golf and there's no way he's going out anymore? Mom used to love to play bridge or do crafting. She won't touch it anymore. Has a club membership been given up? You know, if they stopped going to the senior center, they stopped going to their outings. Are they dropping out of everything and showing interest in almost nothing? When that happens, that's a red flag for depression. All right, again, it's that isolation. That's that pulling back, leads to depression, leads to lack of self-esteem, leads to more depression. All right, next. What are some financial indicators? We talked about physical, we've talked about social, now we need to talk about financial indicators. Have you noticed that there's unopened mail? Are they letting bills just accumulate on the counter? Has mail been scattered around? That should raise concerns about how bills are handled and how other financial matters are handled. You can also know, clear indicators, has the electricity been shut off? Has the water been shut off? Has the paper stopped being delivered because these bills aren't being paid? Has the telephone been shut off or suspended? Are you noticing that they're getting letters from the banks or creditors or insurers, overdue payments, overdrawn balances, or other concerning events? Are they getting thank you messages from charities, right? So they are often vulnerable to these financial scams. I was just at a conference last week where the lead prosecutor from the DA's office was there, and he said that the biggest component right now of elder abuse is financial scams. You know, young kids calling, and saying, this is, Eddie, your grandchild, I need money wired, I'm in jail, all right? Financial scams are huge, or them letting people into their homes that aren't licensed and bonded. This is why I always, really encourage people, don't hire a caregiver off of, Craigslist. Don't just, hire your neighbor, because you don't know. And yes, going through an agency can be more costly, but you are ensured that they're licensed, they're bonded. We're not just putting anybody into your home. And the other part of that is insurance. Right? An agency covers them. If a caregiver gets hurt at the elder's home, they're covered by us, all right, and workers' comp. But if they are just coming in as a friend or someone, a private that you got off of Craigslist, that person can sue the elder and take them for everything they've got. So we've got to be really careful. All right, so we talked about physical, social, financial indicators. Now we're going to talk about driving indicators. Okay, again, driving is a huge deal, and especially in parts of the country where the public transit just doesn't exist, nor would it necessarily be safe. But driving also indicates and is associated with autonomy, independence. I can get in the car and go where I want. I don't have to ask somebody to take me. When we think back on it, think about how driving, we all got our licenses when we were around 16, is such a rite of passage. all right? A rite of passage into independence. Well, now we're talking about taking it away, and this can be really difficult for our elders. So what are some driving indicators that you should look for? Well, what's the car condition and safety changes? Are there nicks or dents on the car? Notice the car body as you get in and out. Damage marks can be signs of careless driving, right? They just don't see things. They hit the curb. They may bump into another car. Does the elder properly fasten his or her seatbelt? Even people with mild dementia usually follow the rote basics of driving. It's worrisome if he or she is forgetting this step. Behavior changes in driving. Does the elder seem to be tense? Are they having a hard time managing that traffic? Are they preoccupied or being easily distracted? Do they turn off the radio, or are they unwilling to engage in a conversation with you while they're driving? Now, that's an indicator that they have to pour every single ounce of concentration into their driving just to maintain. Are there signs of dangerous driving? Okay, so people whose driving is impaired are more likely to tailgate, to drift from their lane, to go beyond the speed limit, to react slowly to lights or other cars, and mix up gas and brake pedals. The other thing about driving with dementia is because the visual spatial capabilities are being affected and they're declining in the brain, that person can't gauge whether a person is coming too fast or too slow or how far away they are. They might pull right out in front of them. So these are big issues. What should happen with driving doesn't necessarily always happen, but in the case of dementia, if a physician makes that diagnosis, he or she is an obligated reporter. They have to report that to the Department of Health and Human Services, who in turn reports that to the DMV. Now, depending on what the diagnosis is it mild cognitive impairment? Is it mild, early stage dementia? Is it moderate stage? The DMV has several options. They can draft a letter and send it out and say, we want you to come in and take a driving test. Or if it's so advanced, they can revoke the license right there. Send a letter, your license is revoked. It depends on the situation. But driving is a really, really big issue for our elders, and especially for people with dementia. And I will tell you, I've had clients before who insist that they can pass with dementia, who insist that they can pass the driving test, and they do, and yet in a similar situation still can't remember his wife's name. So just because they pass the test, it does not mean that they're going to function out on the road. All right, so we've talked about physical indicators, social indicators, financial indicators. Now we want to talk about house indicators. All right, what's going on around the house? Look at the kitchen. All right, are there stale or expired foods? Are there multiple items, of the same food? Is there a freezer full of TV dinners? Right, they don't want to cook. They don't have the energy to cook, so they buy all the prepared stuff. Are there broken appliances? Are there signs of fire? People with dementia especially will put things in the microwave that don't go in the microwave. They'll leave the oven on, they'll leave the stovetop on and not realize that they did it. What are some indoor house indicators? Well, lots of clutter. Are they a hoarder? Do they have an inability to throw away things? That can be a sign of neurological or even other physical issues. Signs of lax housekeeping, spills that haven't been cleaned up are a common sign of dementia. Keep an eye out for cobwebs, bathroom mold, thick dust, or other signs of slackness, bathroom grime and clutter. Outdoor house indicators could be yard maintenance or lack of it. Okay, that can yield clues that your loved one isn't faring as well at home alone anymore. And this may have been, Dad may have always maintained the outside, always done the gardening himself, all of that, and now it's all kind of gone downhill. Look for discolored siding or ceilings that might indicate a leak, gutters choked with leaves, broken windows or fences dirty windows? Are newspapers being delivered but not collected? They're being ignored. Sometimes people pick up those they can see on a driveway, but not those that go off into the yard. All right, next, caregiver indicators. So, these kinds of decisions and looking out for safety is not just about the elder. It's not just about the client or your loved one. It's also about the caregiver. And in every class I teach, I always tell caregivers, you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of that loved one. And I know there's a myriad of reasons not to do that. There's guilt. There's feeling like you don't have enough help, feeling like you're the only one. But there are ways around it. The truth of the matter is if you don't take care of yourself as a family caregiver and as a professional caregiver in the same vein, you're not going to be there to take care of that loved one. I have seen elderly spousal caregivers especially end up being my secondary patients because they end up sick. Being a family caregiver is 24/7, and especially in the case of dementia, when this can go on for 8 to 12 years, it is an accumulative thing, and it takes its toll. So something like mild hypertension in the caregiver can result in a fatal heart attack or stroke because it's gone unmanaged for years, and the stress has taken its toll. So much like when you get on an airplane, you've probably heard of this analogy before. I use it all the time. You get on the airplane, the flight attendant gets on and does his or her spiel and says, if you're flying with somebody who's dependent on you and we lose cabin pressure, put your oxygen mask on first before you attempt to help the person who's dependent on you. And this is the same situation here. The caregiver has got to take care of him or herself in order to take care of that loved one. So whether it's just getting out with friends, physical exercise, super important, social engagement that has nothing to do with caregiving, reading a book, taking a bath by yourself, these things are little things that help the caregiver reduce his or her stress. So what are the indicators? If you're the family caregiver, what's your emotional health like? Are you depressed yourself? Are you anxious? Are you having trouble? Are you isolating yourself? Just as the client or elder's life gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it is so easy for the caregiver to get caught up in that cycle, right? Now his or her world becomes smaller and smaller. As a caregiver, you stop doing things with friends. You stop talking to other family members. You stop engaging in your hobbies. Your world gets smaller and you isolate, which means you get depressed. How is your physical health? Are you physically able to do this? Do you have any other underlying health conditions that could get worse as a result of this caregiving? And then, again, are you isolating yourself? Come back to that, because it's a slippery slope. It happens before you even know it, and pretty soon you're really depressed and you're in a bad cycle. Okay, so what are your options as a caregiver? Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's difficult to do this job, but there are options. And again, like I said earlier, the sooner you start planning and having those options articulated, you're going to feel better. You may never exercise them, but just knowing that they're there is really important, and it takes the stress off. So what are some of the options? One is in-home care. Right at Home is just one agency that does that. There's a variety of them. You can hire in-home care to come in. It can be non-medical care where they just come in and help, do the dishes, do some shopping, help your loved one get groomed and up and ready for the day. If they need help at night, be there overnight, help them up at night so they don't fall down, okay? Adult daycare. I don't really like the way this is termed because it sounds childlike to me, but this is the term for it. And this is a day out program. So this means you can take your loved one to a day program. They can have meals, they have activities, they have social interaction, they're monitored and observed, supervised, and you can pick them up at the end of the day. Right? Nice option for you, especially if you work or you just need a break and feel like your loved one needs that interaction, but you're not ready to have them actually go to a facility. All right? Then there's assisted living. Assisted living is a very home-like environment. We can have just straightforward assisted living. We also have assisted living for dementia care. you walk into these communities, they look very much like a home. And they have activities, they have a dining room, the residents have separate rooms to stay in. So they're still independent, but they have supervision. There are nurses on staff, there are certified nursing assistants, there are caregivers there to help them when they need it. And then the most advanced level of care is skilled nursing. And this person needs a skillable condition to be in. And this is more of like a hospital environment. Now, these don't look like assisted living. Then it's more of a medical model. But these are the primary options that you have for taking care of your loved one. Just remember, that caring for an elderly person affects everybody. It's not just the elder. So when I go in to do counseling with a family to kind of brainstorm, what are the next steps, I look at the whole family. I don't just look at the elder, because this affects everybody. If your marriage is going to fail as a result of this, then, you bring in mom into your home. Maybe that's not the best option, all right? Maybe that's not the best option. Maybe this might affect the way that your kids interact with you. Maybe you still have children at home. Most family caregivers still have their own children residing in their home. That may get in the way. Is that going to take time away from your family? You have to think about all of these things. And as a caregiver, what is your health? Like we talked about earlier, what's your physical health look like? What's your emotional health look like? How realistic is this? And then the other issue, and unfortunately this is one of the primary, focal points when you're considering care, is what's your financial situation? What is your loved one's financial situation? Do you have long-term care insurance? Does your loved one have long-term care insurance? Are there assets that can be liquidated to pay for care? Is there a house? Is there a possibility of doing a reverse mortgage? What does it look like realistically? And I will tell you, so for in-home care and assisted living, it is private pay. Medicare doesn't pay for this. Your private insurance for your acute care does not pay for this. If you have long-term care insurance, it will pay for it. Most people don't have that. But for the most part, this is private pay, and this is not inexpensive. So we really have to look at that and be realistic about what your loved one can afford and, how many years out we think we're going to have to do that. So these are all realistic considerations. I would just, wrap up this part of it before we move into the Q&A, is to say again how important it is as a caregiver to take care of yourself. And there are 4 things that you can really do to take care of yourself. One is to get some physical exercise. There is nothing more influential on your stress, depression, anxiety. All of these things are very normal emotions to feel when you're a caregiver. Physical exercise helps with that. You get blood flowing to your brain, you produce endorphins, they're happy hormones, you feel better, your self-esteem is better, and you're better equipped to go in and take care of your loved one, okay? Cognitive stimulation. Super important that you stay cognitively stimulated. If you're isolating and you're just sitting and the only thing you're concentrating on is caregiving, you're going to lose your own brain power, right? Because there is a saying, and it's very true, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So reading, doing some writing, getting out to some classes, even if it's caregiver classes where you're interacting with other people, crossword puzzles, Sudoku puzzles, whatever it is, keep your brain active. So physical exercise, cognitive exercise, nutrition. You really are what you eat. And this is true for our elders, too, who need help, and even with dementia. So you want a diet, again, staying away from the processed foods, right, that are no good. Deep green leafy vegetables, a diet that's high in vitamin C. Now you get blueberries, strawberries, the deep green leafy vegetables like spinach, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, vitamin E that you can get in walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds. All of these things are very important. The omega-3s that you get in fish, especially salmon, mackerel, halibut. So what you eat, you are what you eat. Super important. So again, the things you can do to take care of yourself: physical exercise, cognitive exercise, nutrition, and then the last component is social interaction. And that doesn't mean you have to be the big fundraiser attendee, the party goer. It doesn't mean being in big crowds. It just means interacting with people, not isolating yourself, calling a friend, getting out for coffee with a friend or a walk, staying engaged. Very, very important. So that's really kind of that in a nutshell, and I think we will open it for questions now. But again, if you can do anything here in this situation is take care of you. On the communication realm, very important with your loved one. Make sure you remember, even if they've got dementia, that this is an adult. This is not a child. We're not going to talk to them in a condescending way like they're a child. That's not person-centered care. We really want to value their adulthood and what they've done. And when you do person-centered care on those care options, you're looking for home care, you're looking for assisted living. You want to make sure that those agencies really value person-centered care, that they know just as much about your loved one's social and emotional history as they do about their medical history. Now, we all know in the industry, it's really important we have a medical history, anybody we serve. But equally important is knowing what were their hobbies, what were their routines, what were their interests, what were their traumas. All of that can be used. I use all of that information to validate and redirect our elders. The worst thing we can do is invalidate their feelings and not consider them an adult and a participant in our decisions. Even if someone's got dementia, even if they're aphasic and they can't talk, I talk with them and ask for their input as if they could participate. This is really important to validate and redirect, prevent a problem rather than having to treat it, right? That saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if we know something's going to bother somebody, we're going to get out ahead of it. If I know a person with dementia is going to sundown at 4 o'clock every day, boy, at 3:30, I'm going to have him or her engaged in an activity. I'm not going to wait for the problem to happen. So those are things to look forward to when you're considering care options. And if you're going to have your loved ones stay at home with you, making sure that you validate them, validate their reality, and then redirect them. And most importantly, again, and now I'll open it up for questions, caregivers, family caregivers, take care of you. I know you feel guilty sometimes, but tolerate the guilt and maintain a part of your life. As practitioners, you are in a prime situation to educate family members and give them permission to take care of themselves so that they're able to take care of their loved one. Okay, so I think we'll open it up for questions. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am, Diane. Thank you very much for a great presentation.
Oh, good. You're welcome.
Yes, everyone, it is time for Q&A portion of today's webinar. So please send in those questions at this time. And Diane, let's get to the questions here.
Okay.
You may have mentioned this, but what age or age range do these social indicators begin to arise?
I would say in general, those social indicators start happening, late 50s, early 60s. It depends on what the person's illness is. Most people with dementia aren't diagnosed until they're 65 years of age or older. So we start looking at that, maybe in the early 60s. Are those things starting to happen? Those may be indicators early on that they're already symptomatic. Most people aren't diagnosed until they've been symptomatic for several years. And it's when these things go unnoticed that we let it go. So these are indicators that could be happening in their early 60s. And maybe they won't have a full diagnosis until they're 70, but these things can start happening earlier.
Okay. Next question. What approaches or ideas can you provide when a client has memory impairment and they are declining care or assistance from their caregiver?
From their family member, yes. So this is very common. And this resistance happens because of two things. Their autonomy and independence, they feel like they're being robbed and they're going to have none of it, right? And they also, it may be, like I said, you can't be a prophet in your own land. If your adult child is trying to talk to you and I still see you as my child, I'm going to probably disregard what you're saying. So the best approach is to, first of all, get the mindset of the first time you put this idea out, let's say it's, Mom, I think we need to consider assisted living. Don't think you're going to get a response one way or the other right away. Count on putting that message out several times. Also, really make sure that you are including the elder in that decision making. So you're not just laying this blanket umbrella on them like, I've already made this decision. So you might say to your loved one, Mom, what kinds of things do you think would be indicators that you might want to consider a different living situation? Or, Mom, what kinds of things would you say would be signs that maybe we should reconsider driving? Let them come up with them. The ideal is that they come up with the time and place when that's going to stop, right? Okay, you know what? I've seen enough of these. I'm going to stop driving. I've fallen twice. Yeah, I need to go somewhere. 9 times out of 10, that's not going to happen. But if you just keep trying to put the message out there, have it come from different modalities. You know, I've worked in my own parents where I felt like I wasn't the right messenger, right? The best friend down the street was the right messenger, or the physician was the messenger, or the clergy was the messenger. So you figure out who the message should come from, count on putting it out there many, many times, and include the elder in the decision-making about that item as much as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. You're kind of talking about this a little bit earlier. The question is, how do you get a family that lives at a distance and hears the father saying, I'm okay, everything's great all the time? How do you get the family involved and help the father who is actually failing terribly at home and can no longer live independently?
Good question. And this happens all the time, you know, with long-distance caregiving. And like I said earlier, you know, Dad might be able to pull it off on the phone and have you think he's okay. And boy, you know, if you were there half an hour later, you'd see the deterioration and the lack of function. What you can do, if you have a sibling or another relative that lives closer, you can engage them, get them to try to get over there and visit and start helping. You probably, if you're long distance, are going to need to come out to wherever your elderly loved one lives and spend some time and really be able to start talking with them about, you know, some alternatives and start checking into some things like home care or assisted living. But until you're really there and you can tell your loved one, look, these are the things I'm noticing, he's not going to buy in, you know, so it's a time investment.
All right, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about sundowning and how to prevent or deal with it?
Okay, so sundowning and dementia, very common. End of the day, they're tired, you know, they had a day of stimulation, and that's typically when a person with dementia will get agitated and have anxiety. So the best way to get around that is, like I said earlier, is to be ahead of it. If you know your loved one sundowns every day at 4 o'clock, then take steps at 3:30 to have them engaged in a different activity. Maybe get them out of the house. Maybe take them for a walk. Maybe have them engaged in an activity. But don't have them just sitting around doing the same old, because they're going to revert to that behavior. And I'll give you an example. I had a case that I worked on where the woman, the elderly spouse, taking care of his wife, had dementia and with sundown. So he couldn't even articulate. He didn't even know what time of day it was happening. He was so stressed out, right, because they're burning the candle from both ends. So when I went out to observe, what I noticed is, it was happening every day. It was in the winter, about 4:30. They had these old leveler blinds that cast shadows across the room. So when she was sundowning, she was agitated, but she was hallucinating. And she was sure that there was somebody in the room there to do her harm. And her husband was talking her out of it. No, there's nobody here. It's just me, blah, blah, blah. Well, with someone with dementia, when you invalidate their reality, all you do is increase more agitation. So then she'd get more agitated. So I said, no, what we're going to do is you're going to shut those blinds every day at 3:30. You know she sundowns around 4:30. At 4 o'clock, I want you to take her out for a walk. I want you to get her engaged in an activity, maybe even start a meal earlier. And she started having less and less of it. But it's because he could get out ahead of it. Rather than wait for it to happen, right, and be reactive, you want to be proactive.
Okay, thank you. Can you talk about grandchildren who might be involved in caregiving? What options can we propose to them, be they 18 or 10 or however old they may be?
I'm so glad you asked that. You know, when I did my dissertation study, which is many years ago, 1999, my study was on what happens to the grandkids. Because at that time, all of the research, you know, all the programs had been geared towards adult child caregivers, right, or spousal caregivers. But nobody was really looking at the kids. And all these grandkids, and they could be nieces and nephews, great nieces and nephews, etc. But that generation, they're involved in the caregiving. You know, they're not just passive bystanders because we have busy parents. I mean, I had many kids, preteens and teens, who were in charge of grandma and grandpa from the time they got out of school until mom or dad got home from school or from work, which means they weren't just kind of hanging out. They were doing the grooming. They were preparing meals. They were dealing with agitation. So what we want to do is give them the same tools that we give adult child caregivers, on how to validate their grandparent and redirect them, to understand that this is a neurological disease and it's not personal. So if grandma or grandpa lashes out at you, it's not because they don't love you. It's not because they're trying to hurt you. It's just the disease. Understanding for them that it's just a disease, but grandma and grandpa still very much loves them. And then getting the kids to be able to talk about it. And there are different venues for that. We, back in the days when I was doing the dissertation, we had support groups, but there's so much online now that the kids can access, and just validating their feelings. And then the other thing is if you're the parent, the adult child caregiver, you cannot neglect your child at the expense of your older adult that you're taking care of. You're still a parent. And I know that that's hard, but you have to figure out systems by which you can still spend time with your child. Take them out to a movie once a week where you don't talk about grandma or grandpa. It's just you're focused on them. They need to know they're still loved. They also need to know that this is a disease and that it's not personal, that their grandparent still loves them, and that they're really helping. And that actually, they can grow closer to their grandparent, and it changes other relationships in their lives. When I did my dissertation, one of the key things that I found is, especially with teens, is they got much more selective about their peers, their friends. In other words, they weren't going to bring somebody home who would make fun of grandma or grandpa or wouldn't understand. So they became more selective. They became closer to their siblings because they bonded together to help grandma and grandpa. So it's not all negative.
All right, thank you. Next question. As professionals, we often see a client that needs more help or care, but families we work with are in denial and don't believe what we are saying won't give clients more help. Do you have any ideas or tips on how we can help families understand the danger of not getting more help sooner rather than later?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Again, the families can be in denial. I've even had physicians in denial who don't want to make a diagnosis because they've had this, patient for 30 years and are afraid of taking away their autonomy or independence. With the family, it's about keeping the message out there. Usually within a family, unless there's just an only child, there's at least one sibling who's on board with the fact that this person needs care. And so you're going to elicit that person's feedback and try to get help from them about how to talk to the other family members. You never want to put anybody on the defensive. So again, just like with our people with dementia, with our family members, we want to validate their feelings, right? I know you're really thinking, it would be difficult for your mom to move into assisted living. But let me tell you, if she stays at home, she's a fall risk. And if she falls and she breaks a hip, now you've got a whole new problem, right? Now she's in the hospital, then she's in skilled nursing to rehab, and then she's not going to be able to go home without care or assisted living. So don't you want to prevent that? And the other thing is talking to them about increasing their loved one's quality of life. Because as they age, they really do need to be in an environment where they're successful, where they feel supported. And the other part of that is talking to the family. They're often in denial because they feel like nobody else can care for my mom or dad like I can. Nobody. And what you want to say to them in that case is, you know what? Nobody will ever have the relationship that you have with your loved one. No one else is going to be their son, the son that you are. No one else is going to be the daughter. No one else is going to be the spouse. But someone else can help you with the care so that you can be the spouse again. You can go and visit, or you can have them have home care and sit down and have the home care person do the meal preparation while you're talking, or engage in an activity with your loved one. You get to have the relationship part back rather than all of the day-to-day caregiving part. And you're keeping your loved one safe.
All right, thank you. Next question. When is guardianship appropriate, and is there only one type?
There's not just one type of guardianship, and it's very difficult, I'll tell you, to conserve somebody and do all that because, top value is a person's autonomy and independence. But there is a time and a place for it. I serve as an expert witness in some of these cases, and, we have cases where there's no family. There's none. There's nobody there, and that would be an appropriate time. Or there's family. I served on a case where the family wanted nothing to do with it. because they'd been through it too many times, and there were just too many problems, and it was creating problems in the relationship, and that was an appropriate time. So there's not just one type, but I will tell you, we would like to avoid conservatorship and guardianship whenever possible because it tends to be financially and emotionally traumatic. So trying to find, somebody, a point person that can at least be that contact, and then we can do stuff like, hire a fiduciary to manage, or a care manager to manage the care without taking that legal role of no rights.
Okay. Next question. Do you have any advice about the types of language to use when talking with a loved one about needing additional care? What do you do when the indicators are telling us the person needs more assistance, but the person themselves is not willing to admit it or be open to it?
Yeah. So what you really want is, again, and this is basic psychology, I statements. Okay, use I statements rather than you statements. So you got in a wreck last week. You can no longer drive. You left the oven on and almost caught the place on fire. You need to go to assisted living. Okay, that's going to put the elder on the defensive, like nobody's business, and then they're going to tune you out. So what you want to do is use I statements. Mom, I feel really frightened when you're home alone because the oven was left on and I'm afraid there's going to be a fire. I love you, right? Mom, I'm really afraid that it makes me feel scared and upset and worried when you drive because I've noticed that, you're running through stop signs. You're not, you're nervous out there, and I'm afraid you're going to get into a car accident and hurt yourself or somebody else. So using I statements is the best way to do that. And again, knowing you're going to plant the seed many, many times before you get a reaction. And then keeping, having details. Again, using I statements. So, you noticed she ran through the stop sign. You want to be able to tell her that. Mom, yesterday when we were driving to the grocery store, you ran right through that stop sign and that car almost hit us. I feel really worried when that happens. So providing them real life examples of what's happened, but taking it on yourself, like I'm worried about this. I'm not accusing you. I'm not putting you on the defensive.
Okay. Next question. Any recommendations for assistance or community resources for caregivers of people who are diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's? Most respite services and benefits are only available for people age 60 and over.
Right, and this is where our younger folks really fall in the cracks. And so there's nothing that's like, publicly funded for them. The best thing for those folks is to be able to reach out to nonprofits like the Alzheimer's Association. Okay, it's all free, and you can just call their number and get your local chapter number. There's support groups. There's care consultation. They can make referrals. In California, there's Southern California Resource Center, same thing, nonprofit, free. You can get some case management, support groups. There's plenty of things that you can access that are free online. You can get help. But, for publicly supported services, for people who don't fit in that age category, they fall through the cracks.
Okay. Can you just give us a couple thoughts about the role of the professional intervening for caregivers and for the patient? What should they do?
So as professionals, we are really in a prime place to be able to intervene. Noticing the signs, knowing what's going on, engaging the family like they're our partners. They don't want to feel, for the most part, like we're telling them what to do. So helping them notice what the symptoms are, having conversations with them, engaging them as our partners in the care for this person, whether or not they need assisted living, they need in-home care, they need whatever it is that they need, talking about it openly and engaging them as partners. It's very, very important.
Okay. Well, Diane, we have reached the end of our hour here, and unfortunately we're out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us today for this great presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, and I hope people gained information, and I appreciated being here, so thank you.